Hello and welcome to the Balanced Approach podcast with your host, me, Louis Padian. These podcasts are released every week, so be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to be kept up to date.
Hello and welcome to episode 130 of the Balanced Approach podcast with myself, Louis Padian, and today we are talking about three things that I've changed my mind on as a nutritionist, personal trainer and health coach. So often people think that if people change their minds, it's a bad thing, but I actually think it's a really good thing, especially when it's supported and led by the evidence. I am happy to change my mind on pretty much anything as long as the evidence supports it. So what I currently state to clients and patients and help them support them with is what we currently have as evidence, and that evidence changes over time as our research gets better. We get more and more understanding of what's going on, that actually it's a really, really positive thing for things to change over time. And some of this is down to changing in evidence, some of it's down to me working with people for longer, some of it's just about me growing up, which is a big part of this process, is learning to understand myself, understand people a bit better, but also reading a lot of the literature and behavior change research in enabling me to help others a bit better. So we will jump off with a big one. And actually these three, it's really interesting. One sort of links to nutrition, one links to activities as a personal trainer, and the third one acts as sort of more holistic, which is a health coach. So it sort of ticks all three roles that I fill. So first up is fibre. So initially I'd say, especially when I was a lot younger, when I went through a big weight loss journey, probably about 6-7 years ago now, maybe 8 years ago, where I lost over 30 kilos dieting. Fibre wasn't really on my radar. Even when I was at university, I sort of knew that it's beneficial, but I didn't really practice what I preached. And I used to think as long as calories are all right, protein was all right, I'm sound. So my diet quality probably wasn't that good. And fibre was pretty much like a nice to have. And as I've read more around it, worked more with people, understood more about longevity within health, fibre's really, really stepped up, and it's probably crept up to in line, if not more important than protein on the whole, especially with weight loss and longevity of health. So the reason for this is, one, the research has led me to support this, and I'll read you off a few stats and figures that I found were really, really impactful. But also putting meals together and probably not living as a student so much, especially in my early 20s, I started to incorporate a lot more cooking and adding more fruits, vegetables, legumes, lentils, those sorts of things into my diet. And I found it hugely beneficial, not only to my progress, but how I feel, managing the budget as well. So that was a really, really big impact on this, is that often, especially when we're looking at lentils, we're looking at sort of your beans, these sort of things are really, really affordable, have a really good shelf life, and really nutritious and fantastic for your diet. So the reason around the research would be that high fibre diets are constantly linked with better weight management, better appetite regulation, and better metabolic health long term. When we look at the bigger and more robust research, stuff like meta-analysis, always associate higher fibre intake with lower risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and just living longer, so avoiding premature death. And those things are all massive, and they aren't things that as a younger person I used to really consider, but know that actually starting it is probably going to be beneficial as I get older, help prevent some of these conditions. Increasing your fibre content is really, really, really powerful in especially things like colorectal cancer, but especially heart disease, and just is associated with a better quality diet as well. So not only has my fibre intake increased, but also the quality of my diet, because I've been having lots more fruits and vegetables, lots more whole grains, lots more kidney beans, lentils, those sorts of things, lots more whole grains in general. And I probably fit into the category of people who probably weren't hitting their fibre intake. The only way that I probably was during periods of maintenance, because I'm bigger, carry a lot more muscle, was carrying more body fat as well, that the amount of food that I was having, I was probably was hitting that fibre, but not really intentionally. It's more of sort of a byproduct of the amount of food I was eating. But very few people tend to hit, I think it's about 18% of people hit the recommended fibre intake, which is 30 grams per day. And often I think the average is around 12 to 18. That's sort of reported amongst people. So a lot of people aren't really hitting half. And for every 7 grams of dietary fibre that you have in your diet, you increase, and this is sort of a dose respondent relationship, where for every 7 grams you include, you get 9% lower risk of cardiovascular disease and 7 to 8% lower risk of total mortality, which is massive. And the interesting thing about fruits and vegetables that I really didn't realize until I dug into it is that we don't really have like a top end. And one of the things that I found really useful in improving my fruit and veg intake, and again, this sort of helped form my ethos and values with my coaching, is monitoring that intake. So there's a really good app. Often people know MyFitnessPal, really good app, really good introduction to tracking calories and protein, things like that. NutriCheck, which is a more expensive version, but it's a lot more in detail, a lot more in depth, a lot more reliable with a lot of the information on there. But you can track servings of fruit and veg on there, which when I started doing that a couple of years ago now, I sort of really got in the habit of trying to squeeze as much in there as possible. And that's something that stuck with me probably over the last 5 years. So I found it a really useful tool. So if that's something you're struggling with and struggling of how to implement, that's a really good way to introduce it, and just trying to get as much fibre into your diet as possible. Slowly introduce it. Don't chuck it all in there in one go, because you might find that you have some digestive issues, but it will pay off in the long run in reducing your risk of lots of health conditions, but hopefully longevity in life as well. The key thing that I speak to patients and clients about is that it isn't magic, and there is rarely any magic in nutrition and activity. But it is one of the heroes that I would go, right, if you've got a lot of fruits and vegetables and a good amount of fibre in your diet, then you're probably in a good spot. And I'd look to drop it in throughout the day. So how can we get a bit more fibre in at breakfast, with our snacks, with our lunch, with our dinners, with our desserts, whatever we're having, trying to get one of your 5 a day in. And that will slowly stack up. So if we can bump that from half a serving per meal or snack to 1 to 1.5, we're slowly hitting those double digits numbers, which there's no real sort of upper guideline to the amount of fruits and vegetables and fibre in our diet, as long as we're not causing digestive issues or discomfort. So the health benefits don't really stop or go reverse. They're so nutritious, so nutrient dense. Usually foods that are high in fibre have lower in calories per gram. They tend to have other nutrients in there. So you're looking at your vitamins and minerals, looking for lower in salt, for example, if we're looking at whole foods. So there's lots of correlations with having foods that are higher in fibre. Like I said, it's just about bulking out meals with lentils is a really good one that I rely upon, because it's really cheap, has good shelf life, really good source of protein as well as fibre. So if you're making a bolognese or a chili, putting some lentils in there as well, or throwing in some kidney beans into the mix, or grating in a carrot, for example, and almost having those hidden vegetables and beans in there to boost the fibre content, because that will help with your fullness levels from it. But also you're getting lots of other vitamins and minerals in there. You get a lot more volume, and we know potentially we're helping with our long-term health. And it's something, if patients and clients are really struggling with their hunger, that I'd really lean into, because portions of fruits and vegetables are quite low in calories, quite voluminous, a lot of water content in them a lot as well, and they're easy to sort of manage your appetite with and really lean into. So if you're having breakfast, for example, with some porridge, again, really good source of fibre, but we might want to bulk it out and add in some berries in there, or we might want to throw in a banana, for example, or some chia in there as well to add a bit of fat, fibre and protein. So mixing all those in together, but really focusing on fibre is a really important part of the diet, can be really beneficial, and something that I've learned personally, something that I implement with a lot of patients and clients, that will improve their results, their longevity with health, but also potentially improves, reduces the cost of their food bill as well, which I think is a really big thing at the moment. So the second thing I'd probably change my mind on would be more equaling better. And this is probably something that when I was a lot younger would be just about doing more steps, getting more protein in, getting hitting more weights, or training more, adding more intensity to my training. And that was something that probably when I was younger, because you're made of rubber and glue, you sort of get away with and can be really resilient. But as I've got older, actually, I've gone to more of a Goldilocks approach, which is right, finding the right dose for me, but finding the right dose for clients and patients as well. And there is a point where obviously we're trying to improve people's health, and often people are looking from a point of their diet not being quite where they want it, so they're wanting to improve, and what can we get more of their more in their diet. With activity, they're probably not as active as they'd like to be, and there's other things that we might focus on around that, around lifestyle factors, but it's usually about increasing the things, the positive impacts, and reducing the negative, or potentially things that are having a negative impact on them. But we've got to find the right dose. And we know from a lot of the research, and a lot of the research, it's around that dose response is there, but the payoff reduces the more we do it. So, for example, when we look at weight loss, we're trying to get that first 5%, because that's clinically significant. The vast majority of benefits come within that 5%. Yes, more weight loss might help for a lot of people, especially if their weight's a lot higher than what we'd want it to be. But that initial 5% is that initial first bit is really important. So again, the vast majority of the gain. Same with steps, that often the number that's thrown around is 10,000 steps, but we know the vast majority of benefits come and level out around 7,000 steps. More steps will probably burn more calories, but the payoff in regards to health outcomes won't be as much. So focusing on what's the right dose for that person in regards to protein, sleep, steps, fruit and veg intake, for example, where the expectations are probably the best thing that we need to manage. So if we look at some of the research, weight loss trials show that adherence is like a bottleneck, and overly intense programs do get better results potentially, but their drop-offs are a lot bigger as well. And actually, we need to find the right dose for that person in regards to activity, exercise, and diet. And we know that we need to make sure that these goals are realistic enough to maintain, especially on those sort of messy weeks. So this is why, again, I'm not a big fan of these 12-week transformations, 90-day transformations, whatever they are, or what is it 90, 60 hard, or whatever that program is. It is unrealistic in the long term, and people can hold on for as long as they can. Some people get to the end, a lot of people don't, because they just struggle to adhere to it, and they feel like they've failed, and actually the program's not set up and for them to succeed, which is the problem. So us finding the right amount of exercise, the right amount of calorie deficit, for example, is a really good way for us to make sure that the change you're making are sustainable, that you're still going to make progress, but they're also sustainable long term. And that's why we need to find the right dose response. So instead of aiming for the perfect amount, which would be you need to be hitting 10,000 steps a day, you need to be hitting 2 grams of protein per kilo, actually someone going from half a gram per kilo of body weight to 0.7 grams per kilo of body weight will have big benefits on the amount of muscle mass, their recovery, probably their satiety as well. And as we get higher and higher, so we might go to 1.5, we know there isn't any potential benefits in regards to muscle gain and muscle mass past that 1.6, 1.8 grams per kilo. You can eat more. Will it be a detriment? No. It might push you over your calories potentially, and it might help with appetite regulation, but the trade-offs, is it really worth pushing and pushing and pushing? And that's where more isn't better. So finding the right amount for that person is really important. Same with physical activity, same with sleep, same with targets around fruits and vegetables. For example, me telling someone who doesn't eat any fruits and vegetables that they need to hit 5 a day, and that's what we're aiming for. That might be the long-term goal, but initially let's have a look at trying to get 1 in per day. How are we going to get that in? Then once we've got that consistently, had a bit of variety within that, right, how can we squeeze another 1 in? And it might be that 3 is their limit, that no matter how hard they try, more than 3 is really, really a push for them. They have to be really, really focused. And some weeks might hit it, but other weeks they might go back and revert back to 1, maybe 2. Actually, 3 is probably a good target that's manageable for them for now, and hopefully we can push on in the future and try and get that a little bit more in. But more isn't always better, because it might add added stress and cause the whole house of cards to fall down. So this is why I have the conversations with a lot of my patients and clients about what's realistic for them, and people have the best intentions, and people often overestimate how much they can achieve in a short amount of time and underestimate how much they can achieve in a long period of time. So when they speak to me, they have these really high expectations around, right, I'm going to completely flip my life around, and I want to change my diet from 0 to 60, do my exercise from 0 to 5 days a week or 7 days a week. And that might work, but I'd probably suggest starting a bit small and finding the right, and will fall on the right number, that they might actually get to 3 to 4 days a week of exercise, when that's probably realistic for them. When instead, if we just jump from 0 to 5, they might not get anywhere near it, and they'll feel really demotivated and just go, well, what's the point? So same with steps, same with sleep, same with food. More isn't always better. Actually, starting smaller, find the right dose response for you at this moment in time. It might change in the future. That's what's important, and that's something that we need to really, really ram home, is that find the right dose, the Goldilocks dose, where it's not too much but not too little, that gets the benefits and the outcomes that you want. That's what we're aiming for. Last but not least, and this one's a bit of a different one, but something that's really, really important, and probably I learned from working with people probably over the last 5-6 years, and as a nutritionist, but this is more as a health coach in the NHS. People speak to me about food, and they think food's the problem, but it's rarely just about the food. Food isn't the problem, it's often the solution, and maybe not the right solution in that moment in time. But me sitting there and talking about stuff that I've already spoken about often falls on deaf ears. So if I'm talking about protein targets, fruit and veg, if I'm talking about steps or activity minutes per day or across the week, falls on deaf ears because people just aren't in the headspace to deal with that. They are heavily stressed. They are lean to food as a coping mechanism. They're feeling really emotional at points, really tired, and me setting certain targets around food probably isn't the best way to go about it. And actually addressing the root cause rather than talking about food actually will help them have a better relationship with food moving forward. So again, looking at some of the research, emotional eating and obesity shows a clear link for using food to cope with stress and low mood and weight gain and difficulty losing weight. So those who emotionally eat tend to use food to cope with their stress and low mood, and weight gain is usually a part of that. Emotional eaters tend to eat more energy-dense food, nutrient-poor foods in response to stress, anxiety, and low mood. This is something I often see with a lot of patients and clients, is that their go-to foods are chocolates, crisps, cakes, those things. And that isn't me saying from any position of judgment. It's just that we are driven for comfort. We are driven for something that takes our mind away from the stressful situation that we're in at the moment. So if someone has a family member who's terminally ill that they're looking after, if they've got a child who has quite high needs, for example, with potentially a learning disability or difficulty regulating their emotions, if they have a partner who has lost their job, their stress levels are going to be high. So me just going, you just need to eat a bit less. It's really insensitive, but it's probably not going to help either. So actually us looking at how we can manage that stress a bit better, the food might sort itself out a bit more. And that's when we can start to focus on, when other things are less demanding, that's when we can address the food. And people that I've spoken to, patients and clients who've sat down with me, they think food is the thing that they need to focus on, and they actually, in an element, that's the thing that they want to control. But that's often what they turn to when they're most out of control, which is probably more often than they like. So us looking at the things that are triggering them to feel out of control, actually, and come up with better coping mechanisms to that, or managing how much of an impact that's having, will improve their food. I've got one example of that actually, when a patient who spoke to me, who I'm still in contact with, she's amazing, and when she sat down with me, her diabetes was out of control, something that she never really addressed. She has a daughter with a learning disability who has a challenging time with sometimes, but had support and care workers in there. And when we sat down, we discussed a lot of emotional topics around how she's feeling, her mental state, but just stress was the biggest thing. So me sitting down talking about the food, I actually said, I don't think talking about the food is going to be important today. Actually, we need to get you some further support. And one of the biggest things from the end of that first session was one of the care workers was allowing her daughter to pretty much eat whatever she wanted, which she found really challenging. So when her daughter came home, her daughter found it really, really difficult to adjust to sort of trying to get more nutrition in the diet. It was a bit more of a battle. And that was really, really unhelpful for the parents. And actually, the main thing that we discussed was, right, so maybe we have those conversations around what's probably better moving forward with regards to the support that's in place for their daughter. Potentially, if certain care workers are better off, maybe hopefully getting them involved more often. And we didn't really discuss about the emotional eating around chocolate. That was one of the biggest triggers for her, and the secret eating in her car. And that came later on. Actually, me meeting her where she was at was actually listening and addressing what the real main issue was, rather than what's easiest for me to talk about, which is often food. So eventually we got to a really good place where, as we reduced stress, we had conversations about controlling the controllables and things like that. Actually, the overeating of chocolate, the over-reliance on the emotional eating and the secret eating started to reduce, and we put in a few more coping mechanisms around that. But actually, the main thing was stress that was driving it. And often there's a lot of psychological stuff going on. There's a lot of stress. Sleep's another one, mood, social context and social occasions. All of these strongly influence our eating behavior, but also where our weight is trending long term. So it's important to actually take a step back and look at what's actually going on, not what we just feel is going on at the moment. This is why I talk about raising awareness, monitoring things so we can manage it, and measuring them, because these are really important things for us to actually get to the root cause. If you're constantly thinking that actually the only thing that will solve all of this is more control over your food, when actually you're at breaking point with stress, and actually lean into food is one of the things that's helping you manage your stress at the moment. So when we pull that away, you completely off the rails, go back to what's familiar, which is food, and you overeat and overindulge on those, then you feel guilty for doing that because you feel like that's the only way to go forward. That's where we need to take a step back and go, what's really going on here? Not what we feel in the moment, but from a compassionate point of view, how can we address the root cause of these problems? So as I said, it's rarely just about the food as much as, and it would make my life a lot simpler if it was, but I actually really enjoy the behavior change aspects and just helping people get those aha moments when they notice what's actually going on. People often turn to food to self-soothe, numb, reward, distract, connect, create a break from relentless demands of life, and being accepting of that's something that's going on and that you're not a bad person for doing these things. The only issue is that if the answer to all of those issues, when our stress is high, when we're emotional, when we're tired, when we're lonely, is to turn to food, that's probably the main issue. And that can create that really toxic, all or nothing, and poor relationship with food. So if someone's life's chaotic, if their sleep's poor, stress is high, and they don't really have any of the coping mechanisms in place, then me pulling food away isn't going to be helpful. And actually, we need to have a look at, right, how can we get you sleep a bit better? How can you manage stress a bit better? How can we add a bit more structure to support you, not to suffocate you in your day-to-day life? That will help us build a better relationship and allow us to manage our food a bit better. So things that I often look at now with clients that initially, when I first started out, because all I knew was weight loss about energy in versus energy out, which is really simple, but it's actually not that simple in the grand scheme of things in real life. Stress, recovery, we look at sleep, we look at emotions and how people are feeling. We do a lot of reflective work, but we also have a look at their environment as well. What's their day-to-day life look like? What does their house look like? What does their eating environment at work look like? And slowly putting the piece together of that puzzle to go, right, what's the overall picture and how can we change that to get it a bit more favorable to what we want to achieve long term? So food is important, but it's not the whole thing, and that's why and I always say this, but I think it's really important. This is why me just handing you a diet plan won't work, because it's rarely that simple. Yes, you might stick to it for a bit, but when life is hard, stress is going on, when sleep's poor, those diet plans become really unrealistic. And it's an easy out for me to go, well, you just don't want it enough, which a lot of coaches will do. I don't think that, but that's an easy out for me to go, well, I gave you this plan, why aren't you sticking to it? Actually, I've had a really shit week at work, and us being a bit more empathetic and understanding and potentially preparing ahead of time, that if they know they've got a stressful week coming up at work, then it's going, right, maybe we need to adjust things a little bit so it's a bit easier to manage that stress. Maybe dieting won't be the main priority that week and actually reduce your deficit or bring you up to maintenance for a week, because we know it's going to be a stressful week, and us adding stress on with dieting isn't the best thing and will prevent you from going, fuck it, I might as well eat everything in the cupboards. And actually, if we can manage that stress a bit better, and you're a bit better fueled, that you're well rested, then those are things that will probably get you where you want to be and make sure that you stay there long term. Identifying triggers, patterns, looking at how we can manage situations a bit better from a non-judgmental approach, which is really important. That if something goes wrong or doesn't go to plan, it's rarely because you're an idiot, because you're not good enough, you're lazy, you're not putting enough effort in. It's rarely those things. It's down to us probably not having the right systems in place to support you, us taking a step back and going, right, what went well there? Because something might have gone well. What didn't go to plan? How did we respond in that moment? And what did we do that we could have improved on next time? And how can we put a plan in place to improve next time? Because it probably will happen again in life. Often these situations come up, and over time, you get through pretty much most situations that if you've got a strategy and a plan around, then you'll just cruise through them, because you know what, I've been through this before, I know what happened last time, I know how to improve it, and I know I've got this strategy that should help you move forward and actually stops you from having those massive drops off a cliff. Setting goals around other things like sleep, setting boundaries and having conversations with other people, looking at self-monitoring and not just going, right, why haven't you hit your calories this week? It's going, right, so what's gone well this week with your food? What's potentially challenging? If something was potentially challenging, right, talk me through it. How do you feel in that moment? What triggered it? How can we move forward with a better plan? And what ideas can you bring to the table as well? And we know that people not only get better results long term, they tend to have a lot less all or nothing response with those foods, but also they tend to stay in the successful place when they get to their goal long term, rather than just feeling that they need to go all or nothing, that they're not going to achieve it, or go fuck it whenever they hit a bit of a speed bump. So those are three things. So fibre went from off the radar to being probably one of the most important things I'd encourage everyone to eat, and that I regularly eat myself and try to really, really exceed 30 grams per day. That the dose response to things, that more isn't always better. Actually, the Goldilocks dose, we need to find that for you. We need to find it in regards to anything you're trying to do, your habits and behaviors. That us setting the bar really, really high often doesn't lead anywhere positive. It's, yes, we want to be challenging, but we don't want to be unrealistic. We don't want to give you an opportunity to set yourself up to fail. And then that leads us down the old traditional route of blaming ourselves, beating ourselves up, telling ourselves that we're not worthy or good enough. Last but not least is that it's not just about the food. I wish it was, but it's not. We're far more complex than that. So understanding triggers, emotions, stress, boundaries, all these things and how they play a part in your behavior day to day, and how that plays a part in you succeeding long term, is really, really important to this process. So I hope you found that interesting. I know this is a bit of a more of a personal chat, which hopefully has been useful for you. But yeah, if you've got any more questions, or if you've got anything you want me to cover, just let me know. But thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you've got any questions for me, just drop me a DM. Probably on Instagram is the best place, but also on TikTok, on Facebook, which is Louis Padian Nutrition, which is LouisPadian, and then nutrition. Yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode.